Is your magic meter running low? Well, we've got a cure for you. Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePauli, and welcome to the Season 8 finale of Disney Coast to Coast. Stay tuned through the end of this episode to hear about what's going on during the show's hiatus, and when Season 9 of the podcast will premiere. But first, on today's episode, it's all about the Home Alone franchise. As you probably know, this year, a new movie called Home Sweet Home Alone debuted on Disney+. But my guest co-host, author Aaron Wallace, and I are going all the way back to the original Christmas movie classic, Home Alone, and discussing all six of the Home Alone movie franchise movies. Then we'll rank them based on our opinions from worst to best. Plus, we discuss how we would like to see Home Alone incorporated into the Disney theme parks. It's all coming your way right after this. For your magically inspired merchandise at a discounted rate, Who's Its and What's Its has been throwing all sorts of sales on their site throughout the holiday season. So go ahead and click on the link in this episode's description to check out what sort of deals you can get today. Plus, don't forget that you can always use discount code DCTC to save 15% off of your order. From beanies, t-shirts, jewelry, and so much more inspired by favorite Disney franchises, you can find it all at Who's Its and What's Its. So once again, click on the link in this episode's description, and don't forget to use code DCTC to save.
What makes Disney magic more magical? The holidays.
Hello, Aaron Wallace. Welcome back to Disney Coast to Coast. You've been on quite a bit this second half of Season 8, and it's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm living for it, and I'm glad to be back.
Well, I gotta say, Aaron, we've been friends for a long time, but will you remain my friend after I've made you watch all of the Home Alone movies?
So it's been 6 Home Alone movies in the course. For me, it's been like over 2.5 days, something like that. And it's been wonderful and awful. And suffice it to say that I'm living in a state of paranoia over like home invasion at this point. But I think our friendship will survive.
Excellent. As you said, we're looking at these 6 Home Alone movies, sharing our thoughts on them, and then ranking them for you. And, so perhaps you don't have to watch the worst ones. I don't know. But to be fair, like, as a completionist, this is something I've wanted to do for a very long time, because I hadn't seen most of them. And I was happy to do it. I now know that, quite a few of them, you do not need to waste your time. But, I'm happy to have done it.
Correct. Same. I had seen maybe half of the series before and have always been curious about the others with despite the low expectations. So glad to have confirmed those.
Yeah. And anybody listening who is thinking, this is a Disney podcast, why are they talking about Home Alone? Well, that's because Home Alone became part of the Disney library when they acquired the 21st Century Fox company back in 2019. And that was actually, I remember, kind of a big deal. You know, when they were talking about the whole Fox acquisition, you start thinking about, oh my gosh, they're going to own this, they're going to own that. And like Home Alone was one of the top ones in my mind, and I believe yours as well. I feel like we talked about it.
Yeah, I think, and not only our minds, but also like media observers, and I think the Walt Disney Company identified Home Alone as one of the more valuable properties they would be inheriting, which is why we have seen them move quickly to make use of it. Though we should note that even before the acquisition of Fox, Home Alone sort of lived in the orbit of the Walt Disney Company in as much as some of these sequels aired on ABC, on Freeform, as we'll talk about as we go through.
Yeah, exactly. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start on November 16th, 1990. And this is the original classic film, Home Alone, available now to watch on Disney+. Now, I gotta admit something. I have never seen Home Alone on the big screen. I did not see it in theaters because of Edward Scissorhands. I'll never forget this. Some of my siblings were going to see Home Alone, and I had one sister who wanted to see Edward Scissorhands. And I was like, well, I'm not going to let her go alone, and I was also interested in Edward Scissorhands, so I went to see that with her instead, and just never got around to Home Alone. I was a young kid. I wasn't like just going to the movie theaters whenever the heck I wanted. So I never saw it on the big screen. It wasn't till the following Christmas when the VHS came out. That was my first introduction to Home Alone, and I have still never seen it on the big screen.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's forgivable because, back in the day, these opportunities were limited and you had to choose. And Home Alone, I had the chance once I have seen it re-aired in a theater. And so I didn't see it in its original run in theaters either, though I grew up loving the film. But just a few years ago, locally, a theater aired it on the big screen. And so I got to go see it then. But it's not something that has had like a wide re-release to my knowledge, right?
It is one of those films, though, that is becoming one of those movies with a live orchestra. That seems to be happening more and more each year, which is pretty cool. I will say, speaking of wide release, like Disney should just re-release it. I think that would be an easy moneymaker for them. I feel like, there are definitely like small theaters that run it. It's one of the ones that run every year with It's a Wonderful Life and Elf and, a ton of other classics. And, so I feel like I don't know. I've just never gone after it. I really, really need to, because I will say it is one of my absolute favorite Christmas movies of all time. I think it's the most current classic that we have. I know a lot of people would say Elf. I would disagree. I'm not really on the Elf train. Forgive me. Home Alone, to me, even though it's 30 plus years old now, 31, I think it's the most recent Christmas classic that we have.
Yeah, and speaking of it being 31, I mean, last year would have been a great opportunity for a re-release, but of course, 2020 probably wasn't the best time to do that. And so maybe in 2025, the 35th anniversary, we'll see Disney do something really big. But yeah, Jeff, I am fully with you. Home Alone is definitely one of my all-time favorite, not only Christmas movies, but just movies in general. I would even say that objectively, I think it's like one of the greats of American cinema. And I know that that's not a sentiment that was embraced by critics at the time, but I think, there's been sort of a generational embracing of this movie in a way that sees it as not just popular entertainment, but as like truly great cinema. And it deserves all the recognition, all the love that hopefully we can give it today.
And by the way, even if the critics didn't love it back then, it was a huge box office hit, like massive.
Correct. I believe it was the highest grossing film of that year. And then it sort of became a pop culture phenomenon with, television commercials and toys and products and just like major multimedia campaigns. I mean, when Home Alone 2 came out, you couldn't go anywhere without seeing the poster, the commercials, the toys. It was pervasive.
Speaking of commercials, though, I know we just started, we didn't even talk about the first movie yet, but I do want to talk about the fact that this year, in 2021, we got a commercial with Catherine O'Hara, who plays the mom, Kate McAllister, in the movie, and she kind of reprises that role. What is it, a Capital One commercial? It's a credit card.
Something like that, yeah. It's such a great commercial, so clever. She just falls right back in the role. Like it's so impressive. I love Catherine O'Hara, and that is just the latest in a series of Home Alone commercials we've had in the past few years. Google Play had one back in I think 2018 where Macaulay Culkin actually came back, reprised the role. They rebuilt the sets, and so it almost looked like a mini sequel. So good. And then they did another one where it was just Joe Pesci as himself and his friends in his living room watching the Macaulay Culkin commercial. And he, in a way that appears to be very genuine and unscripted, gets like choked up, like he's very touched revisiting this film via an adult Macaulay Culkin. So that sort of like trilogy of commercials from recent years are just fantastic. And I think satisfied the urge or the need, the demand for a sequel in a way that this most recent Disney Plus film may or may not have, which we'll get to later.
I will say the sequel commercials have really kind of become a thing. I think it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, where E.T. had a sequel commercial during like the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, and that was awesome. It's I don't know. I often find it to be better than what they release if they make an actual sequel. I don't know. They just hit the right moments in a very brief period of time where it can't become crappy. It's just great. So I love that there's more Home Alone content being created this year beyond the new Disney Plus movie. Before we move on, I just want to say, I just realized I said I went to see Edward Scissorhands. That's Disney too now, isn't it? That's a Fox movie.
Is that Fox?
I think so.
I'm
pretty sure. Yeah, because I can remember seeing the 20th Century Fox, like with Snowfall coming down over it at the beginning of Edward Scissorhands.
Well, Tim Burton, Disney, it makes sense. I mean, I feel like half of his projects are Disney at this point, so.
Alrighty, well, I want to see something happen with Edward Scissorhands in Disney now, but not a sequel. I just want to see something happen. But in any case, I guess we should probably give a very brief synopsis in case somebody out there listening doesn't know what Home Alone is. Here's the gist. Family goes on Christmas vacation, the kid gets left home alone by mistake, and some robbers come and he needs to protect the house, and craziness ensues. That's about it, right?
Yeah, hit the nail on the head.
Excellent. And the writer-producer of this is John Hughes. Of course, back in the day, John Hughes was known for stuff like The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller's Day Off and like that Brat Pack kind of sort of thing. The year prior, I believe, he wrote National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. So he already had a classic Christmas movie in his pocket. Home Alone, just 2 years in a row. It's kind of incredible.
Yeah, it's true. And I think one of the many, many things that Home Alone gets right and does so well is it captures youth in a very real and grounded way. And that's something that John Hughes is known for. That's kind of like the defining attribute of those Brat Pack films that you mentioned. And so you see that when, Kevin's walking around the house early in the film and he's got all this anxiety because he has to pack a suitcase for the first time in his life. And that's such a small thing, but it's so real. And all of it plays out in a way that's not sentimental. It's not rosy. It's just grounded and sort of gritty almost. And John Hughes does that so well. And so I think it's so important that he was part of this project. It's a key part of the success.
Yeah, it's really, really, really good. If anybody listening has not seen the original Home Alone, I'm envious of you because you're going to have an amazing time watching it. I urge you to watch it. Have you ever met anybody who hasn't seen it? I can't think of anybody off the top of my head.
I have met a couple of people who've never seen it. And I know a lot of people, particularly those who are maybe a few years younger than us, Jeff, who sort of have seen Home Alone. It's been on in the background in Christmases past, and they maybe saw it when they were kids, and they have only a vague familiarity with it.
Okay, I'm going to get into old man talk right now. Aaron, the generation below us has this thing against seeing anything that wasn't made for them. It's kind of mind-blowing to me. They refuse to go back and watch stuff, it seems like. And anybody young listening, please go back. I get it. It's 30 years old, but it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I think there is some of that out there, but also the ways in which people discover movies, they've changed so much. For us, we found films really one of three ways. You were channel surfing, or you walked in a video store and you had 200 things to choose from, and it was the same 200 for the most part every week. Or your parents took you to a movie. That was how you discovered things. And so I think now in the digital world where every movie ever is at your fingertips, if there's not some sort of force that's saying, hey, here's the movie you're going to watch this week, then I do think a lot of these classics fall by the wayside. But yeah, hopefully people continue to discover Home Alone because it holds up.
Something I want to mention, and I say this with all the sincerity in the world, one of my favorite things about Home Alone is the performance from Catherine O'Hara as Kate McAllister. I legitimately believe she deserved an Oscar nomination for her performance in this film.
100%. She is so good. Obviously, we know Catherine O'Hara as a comedy star, and she's hilarious in this movie. But also, the love that she manifests as a mother for her son, and the fierce drive that she has, she's going to find him, she's going to protect him. It is so compelling and so believable. And for her to be able to combine all of that into one performance is just really impressive.
Yeah, just curious, do you happen to know who won Best Actress at the Academy Awards that year?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, she wasn't nominated, nor would a film like this, generally be even in the running or a part of the conversation, though I think it should be.
Kathy Bates won for Misery.
Okay, well, I mean, Kathy Bates is amazing too.
Yeah, the other nominees were Angelica Houston in The Grifters, Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman, Meryl Streep in Postcards from the Edge, and Joanne Woodward in Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. I'm just saying, I think Catherine O'Hara should have been in there. She's amazing, and I love her, so there's that. We could go on and on and on forever about this first one. I want to make sure I hit some of your favorite moments, favorite things about it.
Oh, gosh. I mean, there's just so much I could say. First of all, we have to talk about the art direction in this movie, because I think a big part of what makes Home Alone so indelible is how in love it is with Christmas, both explicitly and implicitly, and it's the subtle ways that it sort of ingrains itself as a Christmas film that makes it so powerful. So you look at the art direction, the fact that inside their home, every wall is either green or red. Everyone is wearing shades of green or red clothing. Kevin, like most of the scenes of the movie, he's wearing like flannel with shades of green and red. When it's not green or red, then it's a beige or a blue. So it's these like cooler winter tones. And so in that very like subtle way, it is bringing us into almost subconsciously into like a festive state of mind from the get-go, before the story even begins. And then it continues throughout. You look at like Little Nero's Pizza. I mean, it's the colors of Italy, sure, but again, it's like red and green. We talk about with Imagineering, attention to detail. That's what it is in this film. But there's so much. It's the writing. The dialogue, it's so like fresh and alive and hilarious and clever and unexpected. I don't know. What is it about this movie that like sticks to you?
I mean, aside from Catherine O'Hara, the other thing that sticks out to me that I feel like more recently people have talked about it, but for a long time, I feel like people did not know that this score was written by John Williams. And I feel like it's the most underrated John Williams score of all time. Of course, John Williams is known for music from films like E.T., Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, Star Wars. But this is an unbelievable score by him. And I've heard interviews with director Chris Columbus who said like, that was the thing that made it legitimate for them, for the filmmakers. They were like, when we got John Williams, which they never thought they would actually get. And of course, he went on to do Harry Potter with Chris Columbus. He was like, that's what made the film legit. And I would argue that like, it would still be a great movie without the John Williams score. But I don't know if it would be the classic without the John Williams score. And maybe that's saying a lot, but I don't know.
No, I think that's true. I mean, I think it's integral to the movie's magic, to its charm. And it's sort of like the story you hear of the making of Star Wars or the making of Jaws, where they thought they had a disaster on their hands until they turned on John Williams' score, and it totally transformed the movie. He has that magical effect. And speaking of Chris Columbus, he is sometimes sort of like poo-pooed as one of the weaker directors in the Harry Potter series, but watching Home Alone like reinforces for me, first of all, not only how great he is at directing child actors, as we saw in Harry Potter as well, but also like he is a fabulous director. And I know that John Hughes has said that when he wrote the script, it was primarily a slapstick story, and it was when Chris got involved that he said, "Hey, we need to make this." We need to play up the heart. We need to make this an endearing story first and foremost. And I think like that's what makes it work. And so for him, again, to be able to blend the tones is incredible. But just the last thing I want to touch on, like that really makes this movie so powerful for me, is the blend of sentimentalism with mystery, with danger, with fear. And like you get that in the opening title sequence, the score. It starts off very Christmassy and playful and jolly, and then like 3 seconds in, like this, it turns, right? And there's like danger, and it's like almost like a horror score there for a moment. And Home Alone plays with that. I think like fundamentally the movie is a meditation on fear. Like that is its central theme, is facing and conquering fear. And it's just really, it's an unexpected combination for a Christmas movie.
Yeah, I want to talk about a few little details before we move on. And this film that I didn't catch, some of these I caught years ago, but I certainly didn't in the first dozen viewings of the film. And that is the detail of Kevin's plane ticket getting thrown away. Do you remember this scene in the kitchen at the beginning when the milk spills and they're trying to clean it all up? And there's this shot of everybody grabbing napkins and cleaning it and it all getting thrown in the wastebasket. And crumpled up in that is Kevin's airline ticket. And I was like, that's a detail I missed for so many years, but I'm like, oh, that just makes it so much more believable.
Yeah, and that's something this movie is really good at is setting something up and then having payoff later. And that happens again and again, just like when Kevin is first home alone and he's celebrating by eating junk food and watching R-rated movies. And then, of course, we have angels with filthy faces. And then that becomes integral to the plot twice more later in the movie. And it's just like there's not a second of wasted screenplay time. Like everything that happens matters, even those little moments like you just pointed out. And by the way, in that scene when the milk spills on the passport, like as a kid, you don't fully appreciate the horror of that. But like as an adult, I get it. Like your whole family, the night before you leave for an international flight, the passports, all of them get doused in milk. Like what a horror story.
That's hilarious. I love that. Another thing I just want to point out, just because I love kind of mistakes in movies. They drive me crazy, but I also love them. Do you know the whole counting error in this movie?
When she's counting the kids' heads?
Yeah. Do you know what happens here?
Because she starts counting and then Buzz starts counting different numbers to mess her up because Buzz is a jerk and she gets off. Is that what you're talking about?
No, she counts herself twice.
Okay.
She counts her when she's counting the head. She counts herself, I think, as number 3. And then you see her like in the background of a shot because the camera's inside the van pointed out. And you see her hit her head again as the last count. I believe the number's 11. And so I'm like, wait a second. Then there should have been one extra kid. So like this girl clearly had no idea how many kids were supposed to be on the trip to begin with. But it's a weird error that's stuck in the movie. I read about this one, so it's not one that's super obvious, but once you see it, you'll never unsee it. So you're welcome, everybody.
Fascinating. That's kind of like the whole Kevin orders pizza while the phone lines are down.
Oh, geez. I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Oh, continuity errors, man. They're crazy. The uncle's a jerk. Just putting that out there. There's nothing likable about the uncle. It drives me crazy. And the sledding down the stairs, all I got to say is my house that I grew up in is set up exactly like that. And oh my gosh, I wanted to try that so badly.
You never did?
Oh, no, you would have crashed. What he does is impossible. The way that staircase is aligned with the door, it's not straight on. He would have crashed into the wall. No question about it.
Yeah. There's a lot of that in this film series, too.
Yeah. In any case, folks, if you love the original film as much as we do, highly suggest The Movies That Made Us on Netflix. This is a really fun series, and one of their episodes is all about Home Alone. I assume you've seen it, right, Aaron?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. So let's move on to Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. This was released on November 15th, 1992. So this is 2 years after the first movie came out, but the story takes place 1 year later. And this, of course, is available to watch on Disney+. This one, we still have John Hughes as the writer-producer of it. And to me, I always kind of imagine what the studio pitch was for this movie. And it's basically they walk in a room and they say, hey, the first one was really successful. We're going to make the same exact movie, but bigger. And instead of being alone at home, he's alone in New York City. And that's essentially it, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. My friend Blake Taylor of the Park People podcast has an argument that essentially Home Alone 2 is like reboot culture before reboot culture was a thing. Like it is basically the type of remakes that we make now with Jurassic World, except that it was made contemporaneously with the original cast. And he sort of said like, isn't that better? Because like we didn't have to recast the kid. We got to do it with Macaulay Culkin while he was still the same age, which I think is a really interesting way to think about it.
That is interesting. Just speaking of that whole concept of the reboot making the same movie again, the most guilty of this is the new Ghostbusters Afterlife. Have you seen it?
Oh, yeah. It's exactly the same movie. And
it's exactly the same movie minus Rick Moranis. That's about it.
Yeah. Did you like it, by the way?
I enjoyed it. It was fine. I'm not like a diehard Ghostbusters guy. I've always been like a casual Ghostbusters fan. And I would say I enjoyed the movie, but like the last 30 minutes is the last 30 minutes of Ghostbusters. Like, they're not even trying to sugarcoat it. It's the same exact movie, right, which I find really fascinating and frankly, a little surprised at how well people have reacted to that. Fans seem to love it, but I don't know. I found it interesting. What do you think?
Yeah, basically the same as you. It just needed Rick Moranis. That's all.
Oh, God, it needed Rick Moranis. I would have died. I kept sitting through those credits, waiting and waiting and waiting. He doesn't show up. Anyway, back to Home Alone 2. Some of the similarities that we see is, we get the pigeon lady in this one instead of the next door neighbor who was scary. In fact, I think they even wear the same boots. I'm pretty sure there's a shot where you see her in the same boots as he had in the first one, which was like a big thing in the first one. There's a lot of close-ups on his boots. And as I was rewatching, there was a shot of her boots and I'm like, I think they're the same boots, which is crazy.
Yeah. Okay, can we just to hop back to the first movie, speaking of Marley and all those shots of him and his boots and everything, the very first time we see Marley in the first movie when Buzz is telling the story of like the Shovel Slayer, and Marley looks up at the window, but he's really looking right into the camera. And that shot amazes me. The look on Old Man Marley's face, because we need to perceive him in the moment as menacing, because as a first-time viewer, we don't know that he's not the Shovel Slayer, right? So it's a scary moment. But upon rewatch, there's such like sadness and like this forlorn desire to be known and understood. Like you can read in his face both those things. Like I'm menacing for the first time viewing, but upon a second viewing, I wish these kids didn't think this about me, but what can I do about it? It's like such good acting in one facial expression.
Are you saying he should have been nominated for Best Supporting Actor for the Academy Awards?
Absolutely, unquestionably.
I don't know who was nominated in that category for that year, but yeah, no, I mean, there's so much good stuff going on. It's crazy. So we get the pigeon lady, who also I think gives a great performance. I love this Irish actress.
She should have been Best Supporting Actress at the Oscars. And by the way, can we just say the legacy of Mary Poppins? Because this is basically the St. Paul's Cathedral Feed the Birds lady revisited.
Totally. Absolutely. And, of course, some other similarities. We get the VHS Angels with Filthy Souls situation coming back. It's, I guess this is a sequel within a sequel, right?
That's right. Yeah. It's very cool how they created this sort of like in-universe saga of film noir, which has a slight Great Movie Ride connection, I believe, because Angels with Filthy Souls is a play on the real-life movie Angels with Dirty Faces, which was one of two films, if I recall, that the James Cagney scene in The Great Movie Ride borrowed dialogue from. There was The Public Enemy, which is the one that is credited in the course of the attraction, but some of the dialogue also comes from Angels with Dirty Faces.
That would have been a great trivia question.
Yeah, I was just thinking that to myself as I said it.
I like it. That's good. We also get the silhouette trick coming back. Of course, in the first movie, we have him throwing a party with silhouettes in his house. In this one, we get the shower scene. I love the inclusion of It's a Wonderful Life in so many of these movies and in all these different languages. This time it's in Spanish, I believe, because they're in Miami, constantly in the rain, which I find really funny considering how often I visit Orlando now and Florida. I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty accurate. All that rain.
Yeah, they really beat up on Florida in this movie.
They certainly do, don't they? Any other similarities that just were like super, I mean, not even trying to, trick us into thinking it's something new. It's the same exact.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many pieces. I mean, even during the sort of battle sequence toward the end of the movie, Kevin reuses a lot of the same dialogue or types of dialogue. Like when he stands at the top of the stairs, he says, "Hey, why don't you try to chase me up the stairs?" Like he does something very similar in the first movie. So there's a lot of that. But I'm also very interested in the ways that this movie is different from the first. Or really what I should say is, here's what fascinates me about Home Alone 2. It commits essentially every sequel sin, so to speak. Like everything that critics ever complain about in a big Hollywood sequel, this movie does it. All the bad things. And yet, it somehow, to me at least, is this like grand emotional triumph at the end. Like it's a really excellent movie. And so it's like, how does it get away, or at least come very close to getting away with all these sequel sins? And I think there's really a lot to that. And I mean, we can talk about it as we walk through it, but First of all, switching the location to New York City, it's not just that they went somewhere else. Like, it's New York City at Christmas. Like, this movie is as effective as a travelogue, as a showcase for the magic of New York at this time of year, as it is like an adventure story. So I think that's a big part of it. But also, like, the characters themselves lean into the fact that this is the same thing happening again. Like, it's really the mom's central crisis in this story is not just that my son is lost. I mean, that's there, but also there's like the guilt of, I can't believe I let this happen again. So like that sort of like knowing awareness of, hey, it's happening again, and making it part of the story, I think helps to save it too. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. Although I think you're missing the biggest difference between the first and the second film. And that is that Fuller has switched from Pepsi to Coke.
That's right. I did notice that. I think maybe for the first time ever while watching them this time. And I don't know if that was like some sort of a sponsorship deal that changed.
Well, there's that big line in the first movie, Fuller, go easy on the Pepsi, because we know if he drinks too much, he wets the bed. And that's like a whole story point, and that's why Kevin's sleeping alone up in the attic. And so like that Pepsi line is super iconic. In fact, they should have made a Pepsi commercial if they didn't. Maybe they did. But it was super iconic in the first film. So to see him, they never say Coke, but he's walking around with a Coca-Cola can, and it's undeniable. I don't think they say Coke. I think
he says easy on the fluids is the line this time.
Yeah. And so, but I just found it interesting that it wasn't Pepsi. So I wonder if like Coke saw that in the first movie. It was like, oh, we're getting in on the sequel. Like, no question about it.
Yeah. Well, there's the big shot of Times Square. And of course, we see a giant Coca-Cola ad in the Times Square shot. So maybe there was something there where Coke was like, okay, if you want our logo in the film, then we can't also have a scene with Pepsi.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. So, as far as like the similarities are concerned, like you were saying, it still works for some reason. One of the things that I do like is right at the beginning of the film, when they're getting ready to go to the airport, we're kind of introduced to a similar scenario, right? They wake up late again, and they somehow like we think that Kevin's still in the house, being left behind again. And as an audience member, you're just like groaning to yourself, like, really? Are you really going to let this happen again? And then it's that moment of where the mom's like, where's Kevin? And he turns around from the front seat and he goes, give me my ticket. You're not ditching me again, sort of thing. You're like, okay, cool. Like, at least they're not letting the same exact thing happen again.
That's right. And I made a note of that moment as well, because I think it's so important, because it signals to the audience, like, hey, we respect you. Like, we're not just going to make you sit through the exact same story, which I think is probably the fear of the audience up until that moment, right? And so it's like this aha, like, oh, okay, so how are they going to get him alone this time? Because this time he's making it to the airport. And so I think there are these structural differences, and there's more of them that we'll get to, that make this movie in some ways even more interesting.
Yeah, and there's a lesson to be learned. If you're going on a vacation, don't rely on one person's alarm, is what I would say. In this second movie, in the first one, listen, they would have been screwed because they lost power. In this second movie, one of the changes is, luckily, they don't just lose power again, because that would have been really silly. We see the dad unplug the clock to plug something else in, and when it goes back, it had shut off the clock. So that one clock was screwed. That uncle and aunt should have been responsible as well, is all I'm saying.
It's so true. And people talk about that often, like, oh, this movie would never work today because everyone would have their iPhone alarms. But I don't know. I mean, with criticisms like that, it assumes that human beings act rationally, but like the wonderful thing about human beings is that we don't. And it's kind of a running theme throughout all 6 of these movies, is that like characters keep making the same types of mistakes. I mean, you look at the wet bandits or sticky bandits in this movie. I mean, they should know better by now, but like their emotions get the best of them. Their desire to seek revenge, to one up this kid, to get the goods, tunes out or like drowns out maybe the inner voice of reason that says, hey, like, don't chase this kid again. It's not going to go well for you. And yeah, that's so true to life. Like, we all make the same kinds of mistakes again and again, despite knowing better, despite past experience and past pain.
We really haven't talked about the villains at all in this film. I mean, you mentioned Joe Pesci a little earlier, but we haven't talked about Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern, who frankly should have been nominated as best supporting actors, I would say.
Agreed. And Joe Pesci, I mean, he's like as legitimate an actor as they come. I mean, this is someone who is frequently in awards conversations. I read that the role was originally offered to John Lovitz, which I think would have been a terrible choice relative to Joe Pesci. And then also Robert De Niro, which is a little more closely aligned with what we ended up getting. But Joe Pesci is so perfect. And again, you have the comedy, but you have the credibility of someone who's like a real deal gangster in terms of like his Hollywood work that he's most iconic for. So he's perfect. And the casting of those roles is so critical to this working, because it's all, even the first Home Alone movie, like what these guys are subjected to kind of pushes the limit for what the audience will buy, right? I think like it comes right up to the threshold of what you can say is credible.
Oh, it's a cartoon.
Well, Home Alone 2 for sure is a cartoon.
I would even say the first one. I think one of the things that's really interesting is like, yes, it's hilarious what we're watching, but like I didn't think of this as a kid, but as an adult watching it, I have this weird thing where like when I see people get hurt on screen, like it's viscerally painful to me. Like when I watch the show Survivor and a lot of the challenges that they do, and of course that's, you know, quote unquote real life as opposed to something scripted, but like these stunt people are doing real stunts. This is not CG work. These are people falling flat on their backs, like getting hurt doing this stuff. And like I find it so painful to watch. But it's crazy. I mean, they would be dead, frankly.
Yeah, for sure. And in both movies, I think magazines have actually hired doctors to do a medical analysis of both these films to determine the points at which they would have died and how many times they would have died over, which is kind of hilarious to read. But this was Roger Ebert's criticism of Home Alone 2, which is essentially, he wrote that cartoons only work when they are cartoons. In real life, we can see and hear and feel the bones about to break. And so therefore, it cannot be funny because it gets too close to our own mortality. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Because this is the focal point of criticism of Home Alone 2, is this sequence in the townhouse where Kevin subjects the criminals to, you know, all of these booby traps that he's set up. And I think it's different from the first film in ways that really, in my view, harms Home Alone 2. So first, the duration of the battle sequence. In the first movie, the first injury happens 1 hour and 17 minutes. I measured the timestamps, right? 1 hour and 17 minutes in, and within 10 minutes, the injuries are over. So there's just a 10-minute battle sequence in the first movie.
Which is interesting, though, because that was the marketing campaign. I don't know. I remember the original commercials. I would guess 85% of the commercial was the 10 minutes of the film. In fact, I remember one of the complaints being, you showed us all the funny stuff in the commercials. I remember people thinking that when the film came out.
Yeah, and it makes sense that that would be the key part of the marketing campaign, because I think like to a kid especially, that's the most delightful, most memorable part of the movie, because it is, to your earlier point, cartoonish, right? But I think as an adult, it's probably like the least important part of the movie. Like what you really focus on is like the drama, the adventure, the heart. But in the second movie, the first injury happens at 1 hour, 17 minutes. So about the same point in the story. But the difference is Home Alone 2 is a much longer movie. And so the sequence of injuries lasts literally twice as long. It's a full 20-minute stretch. And it's this whole Hollywood instinct, bad instinct of, you know, do it better, do more of it the second time around, double down. And as we just said, it was already sort of pushing the limits of what it could be in the first movie. And so I think it was such a mistake in Home Alone 2. And the injury moment that best encapsulates this for me is when Daniel Stern turns into the skeleton while he's being electrocuted. And at that point, you've just, you know, it's almost like a shark jumping moment. And the violence, like the severity of the injuries in Home Alone 2 is so much more pronounced. It's sadistic almost. Whereas, I mean, you compare something like in the first movie, there's a tarantula on the face, there's feathers in the fan, there's a nail in a foot. I mean, these things are painful, yes. But in this one, I mean, he cuts a rope on a like 100-pound iron bar and lets it drop 3 stories onto their abdomens. Like he sets their head on fire and then like has the guy put his head in a toilet bowl filled with gasoline. Like, it's really sadistic stuff.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, Kevin's a bit twisted. He would probably be put in jail. I don't know. Like,
I'm glad you said that, because that's
I think a lot of people would be arrested. I think the parents would be arrested for leaving the kid home alone.
In trouble with social services for sure, which is relevant in one of the sequels that we'll get to. But a very interesting thing that happens in Home Alone 2 that I think is never really picked up on is that Kevin's motivation is very different here. In the first movie, he's defending his house. So, like, in the legal world, we might call that castle doctrine, right? Like, you don't have a duty to retreat, at least in a lot of jurisdictions. If someone's entering your home, you can defend. But in Home Alone 2, the crooks are not trying to rob this house where Kevin's staying. They're trying to break into a toy store. And Kevin goes to the toy store where the robbery is happening and lures them away back to a home that he has rigged. And so at this point, like, it's not really self-defense. This is like premeditated almost murder on Kevin's part, which I think is kind of unfair to his character too. So it's just in this 20-minute stretch where this otherwise wonderful movie loses me a little bit.
Well, you know, we've been talking about great performances from great actors throughout this episode, but we haven't really talked about how great Macaulay Culkin is, because this is a character that, put in the wrong hands, we would simply hate. He's a jerk. The kid's a brat. The kid is a B-R-A-T brat. And yes, he has lovely moments, like when he, saves Mr. Duncan's store. Like, his intentions are good when he breaks that window, but he's a brat overall. And it's Macaulay Culkin that really makes us fall in love with this character.
Yeah, you're right.
He should have been nominated for an Oscar.
Truly. Most child actors, like, this type of thing is done all the time, where it's the precocious kid who says things that kids shouldn't say. And, like, more often than not, it doesn't come off very believably or even, like, appealingly.
Kind of like Home Sweet Home Alone. Oh, sorry. I'm getting ahead. Sorry.
But yeah, I mean, Macaulay Culkin was a rare find, and they knew of him, of course, from Uncle Buck. But yeah, he's
it was written with him in mind.
That's right.
Like, it's tailor-made for him, quite literally.
Yeah, and they saw like over 100 other kids in auditions, like, just to make sure that Macaulay Culkin was the right pick for the role, and he blew everyone else away, clearly.
So yeah, I mean, Home Alone 2, I'll say that when we get to our rankings, I'll say what I was just about to say. Shall we move on to Home Alone 3?
Let's do it.
Okay. I was shocked to learn that this film was theatrically released on December 12th, 1997. So now it's 5 years later. This is also available to watch on Disney+. This is also written and produced by John Hughes. That shocked me, especially when the movie started. I was just watching it for the first time. Now, this is the complete opposite problem, right? Like, in the first sequel, it was so ridiculously similar. Then this third one starts, and it felt like a completely different genre. We get this different vibe. It begins in Hong Kong. It's kind of like this spy vibe to it. And of course, soon after that, we get to Chicago. Do you want to give a brief synopsis on this one?
Oh gosh, as you asked me that, like, the weight of watching, or the frenzy of watching 6 Home Alone movies in the course of 2 days is hitting me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what even happens in this movie? But
this
essentially,
is the one with the chip,
that's
computer
right.
chip.
There's a computer chip that these spies are like trying to get, and they hide it in a toy box to take it through airport security in a bread bag. They go through security. There's a mix-up. Some old lady accidentally picks up the wrong bread bag. She takes it off to Chicago. We're still in Chicago in this one, right?
We're still in Chicago. It is right after Christmas, because everybody's Christmas trees are dead out on the curb.
That's right.
So it's right after the Christmas holiday.
One of the many mistakes of this movie is not indulging in Christmas. They figure that out. All the rest of the movies are pretty Christmassy.
It's interesting that you say that, because, they keep trying to do different versions of this film, right? And I did think to myself, don't get me wrong, I love the Christmas of Home Alone, but I think an interesting spin would be a completely different, like a summer Home Alone. I don't want that. I'm just surprised that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, well, I don't think Disney is done with the franchise. So,
oh gosh, really? So yes, we gotta say there's a young Scarlett Johansson in this movie.
A young Scarlett Johansson, yeah.
Which was shocking to me. One of the things I found interesting about this, though, is that we had like professional bad guys in this one, right?
Yes, and 4 of them.
There were 4 of these, people trying to steal this chip, which I forget exactly what it was. Pretty bad. It was like a world domination sort of computer
Something
chip,
like
right?
that. Yeah. Very, very abstractly defined.
But they were professional crooks. Whereas, Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern were they were bad guys, but they were very much bumbling fools. That was not the case in this one. I thought that was a really interesting change.
It's a change. It didn't interest me much. Like, these are such stock characters. They're just, it screams made for TV movie, even though it isn't. And I will say the production values are there in this film. Like, it does not look like a made-for-TV film. It looks like it was made for the big screen. But the writing, the story devices are all right out of like TV formula.
Yeah, and once again, it's still John Hughes writing it. It's weird. Certain things happen that I found interesting. In this film, we do see that the kid is like really good at gadgetry before he needs to use it for to defeat the bad guys. Whereas I feel like that's something we don't really know about Kevin McAllister until we see him using it to defeat them toward the end of the film, right? Like, this one really sets up the fact that this kid has knowledge and traps and such.
Yeah, maybe knowledge he acquired, or maybe a new interest he acquired as a result of the first 2 films. I don't know.
Maybe. We also don't get as much of that talking to the camera anymore because they gave him a pet mouse to talk to, and we kind of get his inner dialogue that way, which is a change, nothing major, but interesting.
I mean, we should say, this is not Kevin McAllister and Kate McAllister, though they are written as if they are. So that's what's confusing about this. So this actor, Alex D. Linz, he was in a lot of things there for a minute. He plays Alex Pruitt. So this is the Pruitt family now. But other than the name changing, everything about this kid, everything about his mom, the way they talk, the way they interact with each other, it's as if John Hughes is just writing the same characters.
Yeah. Totally. And the kid gets chicken pox, which is why he's home. This is the other thing about the sequels is like the home alone part is never as dire, really. Like, this kid's at home alone while his mom is at work.
Correct.
That's a huge difference. And I honestly wonder if that was oh crap, like, we can't make a movie about parents who leave their kid. Like, once again, I think that's illegal. You know?
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of read it as they just wanted to take a different, find something new to do. But there is kind of a Rear Window, like that Hitchcock movie element to this, which is, because the crime is happening next door for much of the movie. And so he's just using his telescope to look out the window and try to like prevent these crimes from happening. And of course, they eventually end up where he is. But yeah, I almost wonder if that was intentional, if like that was John Hughes's idea is, hey, let's remake Rear Window in the context of Home Alone.
That's interesting. I never really thought of that, but I like that. Of course, we do get some of the classic moments, like the kid screaming in the mirror. In this case, it's while he's discovering that he's the chicken pox, which is fascinating because this case of chicken pox are all over his body except for his face, which is a very weird choice. Just going to say.
Didn't think about that, but you're right.
Oh, yeah, it's very weird. We also get a kind of fun cameo by the actor Neil Flynn as a police officer. A lot of folks know him from the show The Middle and Scrubs. I just like him. But, one of the things that we see the kid do in this movie that's kind of responsible is he actually calls 911, right? Like, there's trouble, and his immediate thought isn't, let me fight the bad guys. It's, let me call 911. Nobody believes him, unfortunately, but he does kind of do the right thing.
Yeah, and I think the Kevin character, his relationship with the police throughout all 6 of these films is very intriguing to me and really could be sort of like an essay or a think piece all its own. But we don't have to get into that now.
Alrighty. Do anything else to add about Home Alone 3? I know we're going on about, there's so many of them. Shall we move on to 4?
Well, I would the one thing I would note here is that the booby traps go off the rails immediately. Like, there is no escalation. Like, from the very first trap, someone is getting electrocuted, a seat explodes, and someone is propelled into a brick wall face first, like within the first 10 seconds of booby traps. And so I think that it's this film that sets this franchise on a different direction. And it's with things like that of the doubling down. Oh, and I think the reason that happens is at the studio level, this movie was produced in a different division at what was then Fox Family Films, which is a division that no longer exists. It later got folded into Fox Animation. But that division only made a few movies in the late 90s and early 2000s. And they were like the Power Rangers movies and this, which I think tells you a lot about what the studio decided to do with this franchise, which is to dumb it down and make it no longer for a general audience, but very specifically for kids, which was such the wrong direction. And we see that through line carry into the next few films.
It's interesting as you talk about like the traps and stuff, because honestly, where my head went was Chucky. The killer doll Chucky, because I am currently very much enjoying the new Chucky TV series. And, I've heard Don Mancini say, the creator of Chucky, how, he feels this responsibility to like make these insane kills in the movies. And like, I get it. It's a horror genre. But I mean, to be fair, if you intercut Chucky into Home Alone 3, I wouldn't be that unbelievable. Like some of the stuff he's doing to these people, it's like Chucky kills.
All right, we need one of your Patreons to go make a supercut on YouTube. Your super fans. I want to see that.
I mean, right though, like you said, it's a guy getting electrocuted in a chair. That's something that Chucky would do.
Yeah, totally.
It's insane. Anyway, let's move on to Home Alone 4, Taking Back the House. Now, this one first aired on ABC on November 3rd, 2002. This one is not on Disney+, but it is available to rent on various streaming platforms, should you want to torture yourself, including YouTube and Apple TV. This one made the huge mistake of going back to the McAllister family with a brand new cast. I couldn't believe this. The movie starts, and I think the first name we hear is Buzz. And I'm like, are you kidding me? They named another kid Buzz in this franchise? And I'm like, oh no, it's Buzz McAllister. Holy crap. And I mean, not only did they make the same family, but they also killed 2 siblings, apparently, because Kevin only has 2 siblings in this movie. He has 4 in the original 2. I mean, who thought this was a good idea? At this point, I think John Hughes is no longer involved.
Right.
But in fact, 2002, when did he pass away? He passed away in like 2008 or 9, right? I think. But yeah, this was insanity to me. Why would they do this?
Yeah, well, it's just made for TV. It's made for very young audiences. It's kind of a quick weekend cash in on a now 12-year-old property. There were a lot of poor decisions made in the story setup for this. But speaking of the fact that it's the same characters recast, what I found was so strange. Did you notice in the opening credits when they say whatever his name is as Kevin McAllister, they have Kevin in quotation marks? They didn't do this for any other character. And I'm like, what are we supposed to take away from that? Like, he is Kevin McAllister in this story. So what's with the quote marks?
That is very bizarre. I did not notice that, but that is bizarre. This story is essentially, listen, the parents are going through a separation, which immediately are like, we love these parents. Why are you doing this to us as an audience? But the kid has to decide who to spend Christmas with. He ends up going with his dad, who's now marrying a very rich woman. We get some very Annie vibes here. In fact, Kevin says at one point, I think I'm going to like it here. I think I'm gonna like it here. I was like, are you kidding me? This is insane. With a bald butler. Like, I'm just like, okay, whatever. This movie sucked.
Yeah, it's really, really bad. This kid is not an actor. No one's a good actor. The story premise is just bonkers. I mean, like you said, the dad's divorcing the mom. He's dating a wealthy model or something who is inviting the royal family to her house for a Christmas party. Like, what? And so that's why Kevin decides to go spend Christmas with his dad. First of all, I really resent that they turned Peter McAllister into a terrible person. Like, that character deserves better than what this movie does to him. Like, he's now a jerk that left his family at Christmas for like some young rich woman for no other reason at all. And it's been in this story, it's been 9 months time since the last movie.
I mean, maybe it's something genetic because his brother's a real jerk, right? We learned the uncle's horrible human. Okay, and then in this movie, we don't get both of the bad guys back. We get only Marv back, which is the Daniel Stern role. But they don't have Daniel Stern. They have French Stewart. I think at that point, most well known for, what was that show called?
Third Rock from the Sun. Such a great show.
So yeah, he's playing that role. He canned Marv, so no more Joe Pesci. He's got a girlfriend in this one. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I do think if you can't get Daniel Stern, French Stewart makes sense. French Stewart deserves better than this film gives him. He also has a female accomplice, which is his girlfriend or wife, I can't remember, played by Missy Pyle. Mm-hmm. And it's just a really bad, over-the-top performance. Extremely cartoonish, to use that word again. Just not good.
Did you know that I saw French Stewart in a play playing Buster Keaton?
I did not know that. What was the play?
Oh, gosh, what was it called? I think it was just called Buster. And it was at the Pasadena Playhouse. And it's something he's super passionate about. I don't know if he wrote it or produced it or what, but I feel like he's more involved than just being an actor for it. But I'm a big Buster Keaton fan. And so I went to see it. And it was interesting. But I was like, oh, it's kind of fun to see him do something like that. Because I only really know him from super silly roles.
Yeah, which this certainly is. So we've been sort of keeping track of, how far into the movie do the hijinks begin, and in this case, it's 23
And by we,
minutes
you mean you, which I love, by the way. I love that you did that.
23 minutes in, we have the first break-in battle, and in that very first prank, Kevin literally floods an entire 2-story home, and we don't mean just like a little bit of water on the floor, like the water fills the first floor up to the second. And then, of course, one scene later, the house is good as new. All that water damage is just completely undone. But that's the level of insanity that this movie goes for right out the gate.
Yeah, it was epic for sure. We do finally get It's a Wonderful Life in English in this movie, which is kind of
true.
nice. Nice little throwback there. But I mean, I don't have much more to say about Home Alone 4. Anything else you want to add?
So another thing I want to kind of track as we move through is, so this is the first Home Alone movie to take place in the cell phone era. And so that presents a little bit of challenge if you're telling a story like this, right? People often say, oh, Home Alone would never work with cell phones, which I don't think is entirely true. But they deal with it in this movie by locking the kid in the basement during the time when he has access to a cell phone. And so he's in a wine cellar with very poor reception.
The other thing that needs to be said is that he is never home alone. There's always somebody there with them. There's the maid or the butler at the very least. So like, he's legitimately never home alone in this movie.
Yeah. And there's this question presented fairly early on of, is the butler, in on the action with the criminals, which is kind of an interesting wrinkle. I'll give the movie credit for that because there's like a mystery element to it here. Lots of callbacks to the first film. Like when Kevin gets out of the taxi cab, he says, keep the change. Mm-hmm. Lots of little things like that. He has a talk boy that does not look like the talk boy from Home Alone 2. I don't know if it was a rights issue. I don't know why they would make his talk boy look different and so much lower quality.
Mattel ended up making the toy, so it might have been some legal thing with Mattel.
Maybe. But the most interesting thing is he plays an audio clip from his talk boy, and it's Uncle Frank.
Okay, I gotta be completely honest. I don't remember this at all. When did this happen?
I can't even remember the context, but he plays the talk boy, and it's the same sort of thing. He's trying to make someone on the other side of the door think that there's another adult there. Okay. And it's Uncle Frank saying something like, get out of the bathroom or whatever, but it's not the same line of dialogue verbatim that we hear in the first movie. So I'm like, did they bring in an impressionist to sound like Uncle Frank saying a similar line? So interesting to me.
Very weird. And listen, I think the lesson here is do not have the McAllister family without the cast of the original film. Just a terrible, terrible idea. We're going to move on to the next movie, which drops the number. They don't call it Home Alone 5. They just say Home Alone, The Holiday Heist. This premiered on ABC Family, now known as Freeform, on November 25th, 2012. This also is not on Disney+, but it's available to rent on various streaming platforms, including YouTube and Apple TV. Once again, we get a new family in this one, very much like the third movie. This story moves to Maine in this one. And in this one, the story is basically the kid thinks the house is haunted. So he's kind of trying to set up things to catch the ghost. It's interesting. Once again, the kids aren't really left home alone. The parents are just off at a party, and there's the two kids at home, although one ends up getting locked in the basement at one point. This one sucked.
I mean, it's not good, but I do think it makes a good faith effort that Home Alone 3 and Home Alone 4 do not, toward recapturing what made the original movies special. First of all, it's much more in love with Christmas than 3 and 4 were. The types of booby traps that are done here are much more grounded, much more practical in nature, more akin to what we see in Home Alone 1. No one is electrocuted in this movie, as far as I can remember, so that's a win. We don't have any of the insane over-the-top stuff. And so I think it's an effort toward course correction, but within the shackles of a made-for-TV budget and a free-form audience. But the casting here, too, is really good. Like, Malcolm McDowell is a legit actor. Debbie Mazar, who's hilarious. Ed Asner is in this. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of carrying on the Home Alone tradition of getting big names, getting legendary actors, even for smaller roles. So there's a lot that I can sort of, like, give a nod to as being respectable in this one.
I will say my favorite part of it was the little girl neighbor playing out in the snow all the time. She just cracked me up. She was very funny. And I would say she was probably the highlight for me.
Yeah, she is funny. And when we first meet her, she's shoveling snow and she's telling the story of the ghost. And so I think it's very intentionally evoking the first time that we meet Old Man Marley in the first film. And so she's both like the kid neighbor in the first movie who goes to wish the McAllisters like, hey, happy vacation. She's that, but she's also Old Man Marley rolled into one.
Yeah. So there's that. Before we get to the last installment, I got to ask you, do you remember a Home Alone spinoff being considered in 2018 with Ryan Reynolds attached?
So this was actually one of my trivia questions for you later, so we'll cross it off the list now. But yeah, I do. And it was going to be called, do you want to tell everybody, Jeff?
Yeah, it was a spiritual sequel called Stoned Alone. And according to the original film's director, Chris Columbus, the original Home Alone director, he said it was an insult to the art of cinema. That was his quote about it. This was a story about a 20-something weed-growing loser who misses the plane for his holiday ski trip. Like in the original film, thieves subsequently break into his home, and his paranoia is only heightened by his intoxicated state. I hope this never happens, but same. I felt it needed to be mentioned that was a thing that was legitimately considered with Ryan Reynolds attached.
Yeah, widely reported. And Chris Columbus did not like it. And he also responded pretty negatively in the press to our next film.
Did he? I didn't hear this. Yeah. Home Sweet Home Alone, the new Disney Plus movie. And, Disney couldn't help themselves when they got the rights to Home Alone. They're like, we got to make a sequel because we can do it better. This was released November 12th of 2021 this year. And like I said, original content for Disney Plus. Interestingly, John Hughes gets a story by credit. He passed away in 2009 and he got a story by credit. So at least they recognize, hey, we're just blatantly ripping off the original. One hard thing to get past for me is this little British boy just looks like Ralphie from A Christmas Story.
Okay, I can see it. They keep calling him Harry Potter, but I guess there's a little bit of Ralphie there too.
Yeah. Which is actually funny because Chris Columbus goes on to direct Harry Potter. Never even thought of that. That's funny. But you want to give a brief synopsis of this one?
Yeah, so this is a little boy and his mom have just moved to America. We're back in Chicago again. Yeah, moved to Chicago from London, and they don't know many people there yet. The kid has to go to the bathroom, so they stop at an open house. The open house is being sold by a family who's sort of facing economic difficulty. They have a little toy that the mom happens to know is worth a lot of money. And this sets off a comic series of misunderstandings between these two families that leads to a different kind of caper than we have seen so far.
Yeah, and I will say one of the things I did like about this is that like the kid being left behind scenario was a lot more believable in this film, more than any of the others, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, Jeff, I might surprise you here. I actually kind of loved this movie.
Oh, wow. Loved is a strong word. I liked it a lot more than I expected to.
Yeah?
I will say. Yes, much more than I expected to, but I still did not love it. I will not rewatch it. But that's interesting. So what did you love about it?
I mean, I was honestly like kind of elated. Like I was coming down off a cloud after watching it. I loved it so much. But I think the prevailing thing for me is just how funny it is. Like it is hilarious. I was laughing out loud in spite of myself throughout the whole movie.
All right. There are like things about it I liked. Like I liked some of the changes where like the people breaking into the house aren't robbers, right? Like you said, there's just like this big misunderstanding. I thought that was clever, that it's, you know, this mom and dad breaking into the house, and kind of for good reason. I like the tie into the original film with Buzz McAllister coming back as a police officer who's just horrible at his job. And even like the McAllister home security system, I thought was a fun throwback to the original. Another throwback I loved was we get another Oh Holy Night sequence inside the church, which is a throwback to the original film. So like, I think that they gave nice nods to the original. I don't think anybody in the cast deserved an Oscar nomination.
I would agree with that, because this movie doesn't go for heart or drama in the same way that the first two did. But I think whereas the others made nods to the original film in a way that felt like cheap fan service, this whole movie feels like a Valentine to the first movie. Like clearly the creative team here loves the original Home Alone and wants to honor it and celebrate it. At least to me, that was my reading of it. And then you marry that with this cast, which has happened. Like for me, it's some of my favorite people in the world of comedy. Like you've got Kenan Thompson, Ellie Kemper, Esther Povitsky, which not a lot of people know her, but she's from the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and she's just hilarious. And she's in this. You've got Chris Parnell, Jim Rash, just a really great cast of really hilarious people. Sharp writing. I was just so frequently caught off guard by a lot of the jokes.
I love the remake of Angels with Filthy Souls in this movie. They did like a sci-fi remake, and there's even a line of like, oh, why do they have to remake everything? And I'm like, okay, applause. I'll give him that.
Yeah, that line delivered by Timothy Simons, I think is his name, from of Veep fame. So funny. And like, what a clever offbeat idea to remake that movie within a movie as a futuristic sci-fi film. Just unexpected. I loved it. We get Somewhere in My Memory again.
Score by John Dabney, we should say.
Oh, yes. A wonderful score from John Debney that very appropriately incorporates so many of the motifs from John Williams' original score. We get also a lot of the non-diegetic like soundtrack songs, like Tom Petty's It's Christmas Time Again, like things that played in the first two Home Alone movies are back for this one, which helps to tie it in. Really great stuff. But I think like there's substance beneath the comedy too. So one thing that struck me is this like Robin Hood element of the story, right? Because you have the mom from London and the son are clearly like extravagantly wealthy, and they have this enormous mansion that surpasses even the original McAllister home. And then we have our would-be criminals who are acting criminally out of true economic desperation, right? Like they're going to lose their home if they don't act. And it's because of like automation taking the place of jobs, which is like a real problem in our current world. So there's this whole idea of like capitalism forcing people into desperate circumstances where poorer people rob from richer people. And that's never explicitly addressed.
But he's not robbing. He's taking back something that is his.
That's right. Yeah, which they discuss like the legality of that and the ethics by likening it to the O.J. Simpson situation, which I thought was very smart and funny.
But yeah, I mean, overall, they're not doing anything. I mean, they're doing something wrong, but it's not like they're like, hey, let's go break into this house because they're wealthy and we can steal some cash. It's not that. They're going after something that is their property that they believe that this kid took, right?
Sure, at first, yeah. And I think that's another thing that's compelling about this is that the bad guys are good people who increasingly do just like one more little worse thing each time.
Yeah.
And that's very believable to me because they are in sort of a desperate scenario. And each time, even though they make the wrong decision, it feels believable to me that these good people in this situation in that moment make that bad choice.
Yeah.
And so they very slowly get into a hole that's like too deep to climb out of.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think one of the best gags is the swimming pool gag in this one. That really made me laugh. I thought that was fun. I find it interesting how I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the first, well, no, I am wrong, at least compared to the first two films. In this movie, the kid doesn't clean up after all of these antics, right? Like the mom comes home and like, whoa, something went down. You have some explaining to do. Whereas in the first two movies with Macaulay Culkin, like the family really never knows. Probably years later, he tells them really what went down, but it's always like this secret of these bad guys, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. In fact, I wondered about that in Buzz's cameo in this movie, because he's on the radio and he kind of recounts the story of what happened with his family when he was younger, but he doesn't include the part, right, about there were criminals that broke in. He just talks about leaving the son at home. Leaving Kevin at home.
I think you're right. I believe, in my mind, Kevin has told the story at this point. It's too good of a story not to tell, right? I think the family knows. I could be totally wrong. But in this case, you know, there's no trying to hide anything. And that was kind of a nice little difference, I thought. I'm glad you liked it so much. That's great. Sounds like it's something you might revisit in future years.
Oh, yeah, I fully plan to. And one other thing I want to touch on, because we've talked about it with the other movies, is the role of telephones in this. This is the year 2021. Like, clearly there's all this technology in the house. And they don't fully acknowledge like the internet of it all. Like most likely this son and this mother could have found a way to get in touch with each other. And I think you just kind of have to suspend disbelief. But they do explicitly address the telephone thing by saying like kids don't have cell phones and no one has a landline anymore. And I thought like that one line, they very credibly erased that challenge.
No, I would agree. And it's true. Nobody has a landline anymore. Not unless they're like elderly at this point. It's kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, listen, that was Home Sweet Home Alone. Anything else you want to add before we start ranking these movies?
Let's rank.
Let's rank. We're going to start from 6 to 1, 6 being the worst. I'm curious. We're going to compare our notes here. What do you have in the number 6 slot as the worst Home Alone movie?
For me, it's Home Alone 4, Taking Back the House.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Solely because it's a fake McAllister family. I'm done. Literally, the opening scene when they're like, oh, this is the McAllisters with all different actors. Nope. Done. That's it.
Yeah, it's truly a low point. I mean, it was at this point where I was like, I don't know if I can keep going with this franchise. But fortunately, it was rock bottom.
Okay, number in the 5 slot, right at the bottom.
Maybe controversial. I'm going to go with Home Alone 3.
Oh, no, I have the same one. Home Alone 3. Yeah, and that's because for me, it's the odd opening. It's the openings of these movies that are killing them for me. That odd opening of being a completely different genre is, I'm like, it doesn't even feel like it fits within the Home Alone franchise.
Right.
So, yeah, no, same for me. The 5th slot goes to Home Alone 3.
Yeah, and part of it being there for me is, even though it does have higher production values than the made-for-TV ones, I kind of resent this movie for steering the franchise in the wrong direction. You know, like it all the bad began with Home Alone 3.
Fair enough. I think we're going to have the same list here, my friend. Number 4 on the list for you would be
Home Alone Holiday Heist.
100% agree. This is the 5th movie in the franchise. And yeah, this one, you know, not good, but there were 2 far worse, I would say.
Yeah, like we discussed, there are redeeming elements to Holiday Heist.
All right. In the 3rd slot, we have
Home Sweet Home Alone.
I would agree. I think, you know, to have anything but the original 2 in the top 2 slots would be blasphemy. So, but it sounds like, I mean, you clearly liked Home Sweet Home Alone a lot more than me. Like I said, I enjoyed it much more than I expected to. I went in with pretty low expectations. So number 3 slot is Home Sweet Home Alone. Slot number 2 is
2 for 2, Home Alone 2.
Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. Now, which means, of course, that the original Home Alone is the best one. I think that comes as no surprise. We have the same exact list. That's a little surprising, but I would like to add one thing. I would argue that Home Alone 2 could be tied for the number one slot if it weren't a sequel. I enjoy that movie as much as I enjoy Home Alone, even with the super cartoony stuff with the bad guys at the end. In fact, sometimes when I watch Home Alone 2, I feel myself actually enjoying it more than Home Alone, not because I like it more, just because I don't know it as well. Home Alone, I know that movie like the back of my hand. Home Alone 2, not so much. So I could tie it for first place.
I'm so glad you said that, because along those same lines, I wrote down in my notes that if someone were to watch Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, as their first Home Alone movie, not only could they follow it, but like they are going to watch an excellent movie without any of the downside of, oh, I've seen this before. It's on its own a really, truly excellent movie, and it just has that 20-minute stretch that's just like a little too much, though even within those 20 minutes, there's a lot of entertainment value.
I would completely agree. And of course, we cannot end an episode about Home Alone and Disney. Of course, all Disney fans, what we do is we want our favorite franchises to end up in the theme parks. And so I just want to talk with you briefly about kind of a dream representation of Home Alone in the theme parks. We're going to share our ideas. Do you mind if I start, just because I'm so in love with my idea?
I would love for you to start.
Okay. Now, as I mentioned, I believe that the John Williams score is super underrated. I think that the John Williams song, Somewhere in My Memory, from the film, should be a holiday standard as much as Silent Night is. That's the one, Somewhere in My Memory. Great melody, great, beautiful lyrics. Love it. Considering how much, I'm going to laugh if we have the same thing. Considering how much choirs are featured in Home Alone. In the first movie, we have Oh Holy Night at the Church. Second movie, we get the school choir. The sixth movie, we get an adult choir with the bells and even the church choir again singing Oh Holy Night. Somewhere in My Memory, from Home Alone, written by John Williams, should absolutely be worked into the candlelight processional at both Epcot and Disneyland.
Okay, I did not have that on my list, Jeff. That's a very interesting idea. I don't know. I mean, yes, I totally agree with you. That song should be a holiday standard, but oh my gosh, the candlelight processional is like so sacrosanct to me.
Well, no. It would fit beautifully, I think. Also, in Home Alone 2, the Christmas tree, my Christmas tree, lit up like a star. Hello, there's human Christmas tree on stage.
It's true.
Work it in. Not only that, I want John Williams, Macaulay Culkin, or Catherine O'Hara as a narrator.
Oh my gosh. Yes. In fact, all of them. Like, just rotate them.
Yes. Listen, I have heard Home Alone music at parts of Grinchmas at Universal Studios. I've heard parts of Home Alone music at Knott's Merry Farm. I have never heard Home Alone music in the Disney parks. I think it needs to be there. And I think the Candlelight Processional, considering how important choirs are in the Home Alone movies, I think it should be part of it.
Yeah, you know what? I'm actually going to watch the Candlelight Processional tonight, and I'm going to sit there and just like sit with that idea and let it soak in.
Okay, let me know what you think. I love it. I love this idea, and I legitimately want it to happen. And if we could go back in time, I would build the Home Alone house on Residential Street just to do an Osborne, family spectacle of dancing lights with the Holiday Flight John Williams theme.
Yes. Oh, that would be so great. I think it's the nativity of it all that's throwing me off with the Candlelight Processional. But I want to love that idea because I love that song being in the parks. Like, that needs to happen.
Yeah.
And it could be, I don't know, there are so many ways. I mean, they could do a fireworks show, right?
The Dapper Dans could do it.
The Dapper Dan should totally do it.
Yeah. It should happen. Anyway, what's your idea for the parks?
Okay, well, I just wrote like a lot of things down. I didn't have like one idea. For many years, I wanted Home Alone to be in the Great Movie Ride because I think it is like one of the great movies, but sadly, that's not around anymore. I almost just want there to be a Home Alone after hours event.
Oh, wow.
Where we have special meet and greets with like the Bird Lady and Old Man Marley and the Sticky Bandits. Like, I want that to happen. And then we could have the fireworks show. Maybe there could be like Home Alone the musical. Some other things I wrote down were, of course, a dark ride if if we could have our wildest dreams come true. Maybe an animated short, like a Home Alone animated short that plays exclusively in the parks, kind of like that Mickey Mouse Vacation short currently plays. That I would love. And then merchandising. Like, I think we should be able to buy the turtle dove ornaments from Home Alone 2 in a Disney gift shop.
For sure, we should be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they're leaving this on the. I mean, I really think Home Alone. I think Home Alone should have been worked into the parks before a sequel was made. You know, before Home Sweet Home Alone was made. Like, the priority, if I were, running Disney, I would have been like, get this in the parks. Like, Christmas is big at Disney. Like, get this in the parks.
Yeah, I think we'll see it happen. I think maybe there's been some sense of cautiousness toward, like, ramming Fox properties into the parks all at once. But I think more of that's coming. We'll probably eventually see this integrated into the Christmas celebrations. And I think Disney's highest hopes for Home Alone would be to put a proper sequel starring Macaulay Culkin in theaters. But that just requires Macaulay Culkin coming on board. He's indicated he doesn't have interest. But then I'm like, dude, you made that Google commercial. Like, you were acting as Kevin McAllister in the house. Like, come on.
From what I hear, he goes into hiding every December. And I honestly can't blame him. Like, I was walking through Target and, like, his photos of him as a child were plastered in the store. And I'm like, I get it. This must get annoying. I totally get it. Yeah. I think we're more likely to see Rick Moranis come out of retirement than see, Macaulay Culkin play Kevin McAllister again.
You may be right, but hope springs eternal.
Yeah. Anyway, that was a lot of Home Alone talk. Are you ready to hit some trivia?
Let's do it.
Do you know the answer? Get your brain gears churning and play along. It's trivia time.
Alrighty, Aaron, do you want to hit me with a trivia question first, or shall I hit you?
You can ask me first this time.
Okay, you're going to know the answer just because I'm asking the question, but it's too interesting not to mention. Do the McAllisters own a dog?
Do the McAllisters own a dog? I think no.
The answer is yes. Because if you listen in the first movie, and this is the first time I ever noticed this, and that scene with the mom right at the beginning of the film on the phone with somebody while Kevin's in the room kind of being a brat, if you listen to the conversation she's having on the phone, she says, no, we're not bringing the dog, we're putting it in the kennel. And I was like, wait a second, what? The McAllisters have a dog? So the rest of the movie, I was like looking for like a dog food bowl or anything that would indicate that this family owns a dog. There's nothing except for this comment. Oh, what? Is there something?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, of course they have a dog because there's the doggy door.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, I mean, that could have just been part of the house, but yes, there's the doggy door that he shoots the BB gun through.
Yeah.
So there's that. So yes, the McAllisters own a dog, which makes me wonder, when are we going to get Dog Alone? When's that movie coming out?
God, don't give them the idea.
I also think we've got to see this with a girl, right? We've never seen a girl in the lead role.
True.
I feel like that needs to happen at some point. And yeah, in any case, what's your they do own a dog, which I find interesting. But what's your trivia question for me?
Fascinating. Okay, so notoriously, some Home Alone fans believe that a long-dead recording artist makes a secret cameo in the first Home Alone movie. Can you name that recording artist?
John Lennon.
No. Close. An icon
is it a
of rock
Beatle?
and roll.
Elvis?
Elvis.
What?
Elvis Presley. So there is a like widely discussed theory out there that there's a gentleman who you see prominently throughout the airport scene where John Candy first meets Catherine O'Hara's character, and there's a man that a lot of people believe is Elvis, who they claim never died and intentionally made himself known to the world by appearing in the background of Home Alone. And there's been a lot written on it. There have been journalists who've gone to like investigate whether this could be true. So if anybody wants to go down a rabbit hole, Google it online. You'll see.
That's absurd.
I mean, I agree. I don't buy into the theory, but it's out there.
That's hilarious. I actually have 2 more trivia questions for you just because I couldn't help myself with this one.
Okay, I've got one bonus I can give you too. So
okay, cool.
Let's do it.
In Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, we see an actor named Ron Canada playing a police officer. This is when the mom's running around the city and he's like, just think like your kid would. Where would he be? And she's like, the Christmas tree. That actor. This actor also played an even more notable police officer in another Disney live-action movie that same year in 1992. What's the name of the movie?
Oh my gosh, I totally recognize that actor from having seen him other places, but I can't place him now. 1992 Disney Christmas movie.
No, I didn't say Christmas, just a Disney movie.
Oh, 1992 Disney movie.
Very important Disney movie.
Honey, I Shrunk the Honey, We Blew Up the Kid.
Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. Yes, he is the police officer in that film who ends up driving the ice cream truck at the end. So there's that.
Very cool.
What's your other one for me?
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that they watch It's a Wonderful Life in several of these films. In the first Home Alone, we see at some point 3 pre-existing Christmas movies play in the background of different scenes. You've named one of them. Can you name the other 2?
We got How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
Yep.
And then, do we get A Miracle on 34th Street?
We sure do. That's it. You got all 3.
Yeah, where is that?
It's in Kevin's house, if I recall, fairly early on.
On the kitchen TV, right?
That's right. Yeah.
That's right. Okay. Yep. Cool. One other question for you.
Okay.
This December, we finally have Disney releasing Steven Spielberg's remake of West Side Story. Of course, Steven Spielberg has worked with John Williams a lot in the past, and of course, we've been talking about him because of Home Alone score, but what connection does John Williams have to the original 1961 West Side Story movie?
Oh my gosh. John Williams, I don't know. Was he some sort of was he a musician? Was he a contributor to the score?
He was the pianist.
Okay. Wow.
John Williams is the pianist in the original West Side Story, which I think is kind of incredible.
I had no idea. That's amazing.
Yeah. So lots and lots and lots of fun stuff there. I also want to mention before we go that I went to an Airbnb recently. I was visiting one that is Home Alone themed in Dallas, Texas. And he has recreated the rooms to look like scenes from the movie. It's very cool. I will include a link in the show notes because if you're ever going to Dallas, he has like an 80s and 90s themed place, but he has like a specifically Home Alone themed one as well. And it was super cool. So I'll include the link in the show notes for that.
I need to stay there. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking Home Alone. I know we're both big fans of the film. Maybe not the franchise so much, but the films anyway. And Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays.
Merry Christmas, Jeff.
I hope you all enjoyed today's conversation. You can hear more from today's super intelligent and insightful co-host, Aaron Wallace, at aaronwallaceonline.com, where he writes all about movies, music, theater, theme parks, and overall pop culture, all for the thinking fans in the world. You, of course, can find that link in the show notes. And don't forget to order your DCTC 2022 desk and wall calendars at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. It's not too late. Now, folks, that does bring us to the end of Season 8 of Disney Coast to Coast. I want to thank all of you for making Disney Coast to Coast a part of your life throughout the year. I also want to wish you all a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and overall Happy Holiday Season. I hope you're getting to spend it with loved ones, but if you're not, always feel free to reach out to me if you're looking for someone to chat with at contact@thepodcastnetwork.com. Disney Coast to Coast will be returning for its 9th season on Wednesday, February 16th, 2022. That sounds like a ways off, but I'm sure it'll be here before we know it. Until then, there will still be something released in the DCTC podcast feed every Wednesday, as I'll be conducting podcast feed swaps with some other Disney and theme park podcasts. So be sure to give those a listen for even more podcast goodness. And of course, if you're looking for the latest Disney news, always be sure to check out laughingplace.com. There are now literally hundreds of DCTC episodes in the podcast feed, so take this hiatus time to go back and listen to some episodes you might have missed. You can check out different kinds of episode playlists at DisneyCoastToCoast.com, including Primetime at the Parks, Princess Pondering, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, Shanghai Disneyland, of course, exclusive interviews, and more. Plus, I'll be having a live stream Q&A during the hiatus this January, so if you'd like to take part in that while there aren't any new episodes, check out how you can at patreon.com/Disney with a Z, CTC. I would like to thank my patrons Jeremy B., Jeff P., Sarah C., Jeanette M., Leah C., Bonnie B., Jeffrey R., Gerardo F., Jared B., Rio N., Philip E., Anna L., James M., Diego P., Monet P., and executive producer Robert Scontrino. These are the folks that make DCTC possible, so thank you all so much. You can find any links and info mentioned in this episode by checking out the show notes link in this episode's description. Plus, in that episode description, you'll find a link for some free gifts from me to you. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. This podcast is part of the DePodcast Network. Learn more about this show, plus find more quality and entertaining podcasts at DePodcastNetwork.com. That's DEPodcastNetwork.com.